All right, well, they're into lectures 12 and 13. And I think before we start, we should start our afternoon session in prayer again. And I'm wondering, Terry, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to lead us in prayer for our afternoon session.
Lord, we see you on your throne, how glorious you are, what a wonder you are to us. Thank you for your holiness, Lord, and that you give it to us. What a blessing that is. Thank you for your wisdom, Lord. You put this great table before us in the book of Proverbs. We want to feast on that. We want to see the Lord Jesus through it. Pray that you would lead Bruce as he directs us, that you would guide his mind in the right ways. He has so much that he could say, and give him wisdom to know what he should tell us in this next lesson. Thanks again for the banqueting table that we look forward to, the wedding supper for our Lord Jesus and all he did for us. We pray in his name.
Amen. Thank you. All right, we're into lectures 12 and 13. I skipped lecture 11, which is on theology, because I think it's important at this point we get into the Proverbs themselves. We've been on the prologue and other material. All right, so the first topic that we meet is in 10:1 through 4, 10:1 through 5, which to a large extent pertains to wealth and money. There are two ways, I say on page 12 by way of introduction, that you can approach it. One is to exegete the text, and the other way is to approach it topically. And so I thought I would do both. I would take a look at certain texts and exegete them. But that's because of the way the Proverbs are and the way they're put together, it depends on associations that are in the Hebrew text that are not readily apparent in the English text. And because of the Proverbs, by their nature, being individual pictures, there's some subjectivity in the way you understand they go together. And the connection is not always very obvious. And it may take some time before you see the connection. So I'm going to take text that you can handle with integrity, more certain integrity, and then I will handle it topically. And if I'm advising about preaching the book of Proverbs, I think that the topical approach is more natural, that people are used to an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And I think, therefore, just as I believe it's legitimate to translate from one language to another, I believe it's legitimate to translate from one form to another. So therefore, I have no trouble, so long as the way you're interpreting the given proverb, that it's true to its literary context, that you can take them and group them together in a different form that's appropriate to a homily or a sermon. So I'm going to look at a few that go together, and then I'll turn to the topical approach. So looking at them exegetically, using that approach, the text I would look at is, we'll look at chapter 6. You see, we 6:1 through 19. I'm not going to do much with the latter part of that, but 6:1 through 19 is a grouping. 10:1 through 5, which is taking us into the Proverbs. And then that should be Psalm 49, not 45. Psalm 45 is a wedding song for the king on his marriage. So that's not quite the right topic here. So, looking at 6:1 through 19, it's really an appendix to the lecture on the femme fatale, the wayward wife. And so it really, I forget what lecture that is there, lecture 8. It's really an appendix to it. And I think it's an appendix to it because the argument being made against adultery is its economic folly. That is to say, you're going to squander your wealth in somebody else's house. And so by way of association, he takes up other forms of folly that pertain to losing money. And the first two are most obvious there. So these appendix to that chapter 5 on the wayward wife, there are 3 parts to it. Roman numeral, it has 3 parts. First of all, the folly of becoming surety for a stranger. That's capital A. And the folly, it could lead to potential slavery. And then we'll develop that briefly. Then on page 3, the folly of being a sluggard. And the folly there is of scarcity. And then on page 4, the folly of the anarchist, that is disaster and detested by God. There's 2 parts to it. So you can see that last one is associated because it has similarities to the things God hates. But let's go back to the surety one on 6:1 through 5 on page 1. And it falls, I'm going to try to do this more quickly. It falls into these 3 parts. That is to say, the foolish situation, 1 and 2. That's capital, that's 1. And then 2, you have the main body where the way you get out of the foolish situation, there are 7 imperatives to get out of the situation. And then 3, on page 3, top of the page, you have a conclusion. And the whole idea is you have to free yourself. If you made yourself surety, you made yourself collateral to somebody else's debt, get out of it. And that's going to be the argument of it. Okay, so let's read through it and then we'll make comment. First of all then, the folly of becoming surety, and we have first of all the foolish situation. My son. Now, I comment there later on. It seems obvious, we've always had my son. But he does not refer to the sluggard as my son. You see, because a son is not only biological, it's spiritual. And the sluggard is not related to the father. Now, you can be foolish enough to become surety. You may have done it out of goodwill, out of ignorance. He'll still own you as a son if you did this foolish thing. Now, if you're an anarchist, this last section, he doesn't address you as a son either. So it's instructive that this is you're on a limit here, but he's still a son. So it's interesting when you actually dig the text, what seems obvious is sometimes not so obvious without reflection. So my son, if you have become surety, and I think I defined surety on page 2. What do we mean by that? And we say you pledged yourself as a guarantor for another's debt. So in other words, another person wants to take out a loan, for example, and the bank, or they didn't have banks back then, but the person who's going to loan you the money wants security to back up the loan. And you step in to help out your friend, and you will take the responsibility. Should he default, you will take responsibility for that person's debt. And I know when Susan first began to work a little bit, for some reason she wanted to buy a car or whatever it may be. They wouldn't loan her the car. She would loan the money for the car. And so she came to me to see if I would put up collateral to stand behind the debt. Well, I had no idea she didn't know how to handle money. I mean, I just assumed you knew you had to pay, you had to keep payments. But in any case, I signed, sure, no trouble. But then I discovered she didn't make payments. Somehow that didn't get through. And the result is I lost my credit rating because I had taken on collateral responsibility. That's what we're talking about here. But notice that, my son, if you become surety for your neighbor, if you have struck your palm, evidently, we're not quite sure what strike the palm is, but it would be like you made a handshake. I don't think it's a high five, striking the palm, but somehow or another you clapped your hands together. That's what we have to assume it's meant here. And it's for a stranger. That is, you're putting up surety for a person you really don't know. And he's outside of your community. So I don't think this would be necessarily applicable if you want to put up surety for your children or someone you really know. Maybe it's not what it's addressing, though I don't think it's necessarily the wisest thing either. But he's addressing it. You're putting up surety for a stranger. I think I want to make that what the text is making clear. Result is, you have been ensnared by the words of your lips. You have been captured by the words of your mouth. And I don't know if I've commented on those. Yes, page 2, ensnared. A snare conceals its deadly danger in order to take its victim by surprise and before he can deliver himself. So you have put yourself into a trap by your words. In other words, you have taken on a debt that can destroy you. Because if the person that you are securing defaults, in that economy, if you defaulted, you would become a slave. That you would have to pay off the debt, and you would have to serve as a slave for those 6 years. And that was the Israelite economy. So if that person defaulted, you would lose your freedom. And there were one out of 6 in ancient Israel were slaves. So it's a pretty high number. So we know that because from the refugees from the restoration from coming out of Babylon, coming back from Babylon, there were 42,000, and I think it was 6,000 or 7,000 were slaves. So that gives you a high idea of the number. And of course the Bible has a lot to say about slavery. But this is this kind of slavery. So if the other person defaults and they would have become a slave, because you're the surety, you will become a slave. And you lose your freedom. And this is utter folly to put yourself into this situation. I think there's some merit to that too, that if you're a student and you take on a mortgage, you're not free. Because when you graduate, you have to pay off that mortgage some way or another, and you lose your freedom. So when you go into debt, you are really ensnared by the bank or whatever it may be, would be the application, I think a valid application. So you have created, by your own lips, you've created a trap that you have stepped into, is the metaphor that he's using. That you can be captured and you're going to lose your freedom. You're going to lose your bed, lose everything. So obviously you don't want to become surety for a stranger. Now I note here that on the bottom of the page, this is one of the differences between the apocryphal literature. So in the book of Sirach, which I think has a lot of good to say, it gives the practice of becoming surety dignity while warning of its dangers. So it says, do not forget all the kindness of your surety, for he has given his life for you. So if somebody had that much kindness, be sure you remember it. But the Proverbs are saying, no, you don't want to that's too much kindness. You don't want to go there because you're not free. And God's people should be free. So you can see how this pertains to being money wise, obviously. Just before that, I make the comment, the Bible prescribes liberality to the poor, and we'll come to that when we treat it topically. We should go through life with a very open hand, like a Johnny Appleseed. We should be very free with our money in helping people. We shouldn't go through life with a closed fist. Liberality to the poor, that is to this destitute, but it proscribes charging interest from the poor. In other words, if the person is poor, I don't loan them money with the idea they got to pay me back a certain amount with interest. In fact, I don't loan money unless I can walk away from it. Because if you loan money and you're demanding it has to come back, that alienates people. I believe money should be used to bring people together and not to separate them from one another. But when it talks about charging interest, to charge no interest, it means taking interest from the poor. That is the destitute. I think, Bill, you were already on the committee when we made that, I don't know. But we went through the study, John Steck and I went through the study, and independently we came to the same conclusion, that it means taking interest from the poor. So in the NIV, wherever we have the 2010 edition, we always added interest from the poor, because otherwise you keep them into a perpetual slavery. And interest in the ancient Near East was extremely high. The minimum was 20%. The maximum would be around 40%. And often it was legislated around 30%. That's a very high interest rate, so that when you had a crop, 30% of that crop went to the owner of the field. And you keep the person therefore in bondage. So there's no interest from the poor in the Old Testament. Yeah.
That's actually close to the tax rate that you get in a lot of African nations, which is the argument why you can't create a middle class in Africa, because as soon as you start to take money, it's all taken away, huge amounts.
Yeah.
Hey, what is, I'm trying to figure, I can't remember the difference between prescribe and proscribe.
Okay. Proscribe is to prohibit. Prescribe is like a prescription. You prescribe a medication. You prescribe this this way of behavior. So it prescribes many positive laws, what you should do. That's to prescribe it. Proscribe is equal to write against. So one is to write for, one is to write against it. Okay, so now we have the 7 imperatives. The first, so do this, my son, to free yourself, and that's the whole idea. Since you have fallen into your neighbor's hands, you are no longer free. You belong to the other person that you have put yourself up as security for. And so, yep. The first thing is to go. And you can see how that is now going to be followed by the sluggard. You have to take action. You can't be passive at this point. You have to take immediate action. So, I don't know if I comment on this. The first imperative is to, do this, my son. That's the first imperative. That is, in other words, the first thing you got to do is listen. And then to free yourself, or literally the Hebrew says free yourself, that's the inclusio, that's the whole idea. That's the first and the last, is get out of it. So be sure you get out of this situation, because you're in a trap. So if you have an animal in a trap, it will make every effort to get out of that trap. And make every effort to get, if you've been foolish enough to get into this, be wise enough to get out of it. So how do you get out of it? Free yourself. So he says, you've fallen into your neighbor's hands. The surety made promises, I write, for a future he does not control. So in other words, you counting the guy is going to, or the neighbor is going to be good, but you don't control it. So you have committed yourself to a future you don't control. One who does not feel grateful for the surety will abandon the rescuers. This is what Cyrus continues. That if you aren't grateful, he will probably abandon you. It's interesting enough. The third imperative is go, which is immediate action. And then the fourth imperative, so go to, and I add to the point of exhaustion. No, it's not. It's in the Hebrew. Go to the point of exhaustion and badger your neighbor. Literally, rush upon him boisterously. This is like the parable of the unjust judge. And with the unjust judge, the woman couldn't get justice, so what did she do? She kept badgering him until he says, I'm tired of her. I got to get rid of her. And he finally gives her justice, listens to her case. And illustrate, at the time we were translating in Luke there with that story, and I don't know if you were there then, Bill, or not. We were trying, the old King James has that importunity, and that's certainly not a new NIV word, but with importunity. And so John Steck was the guy who often could come up with the creative translation, and he translated it shameless audacity, which is right on, I thought. We voted for it, shameless audacity. So it happened at the time we just finished that, I had guests coming to Scotland. We were in St. Andrews, and I had guests coming. I rented a car, and I was supposed to pick up the car at noon. Well, I got there at the Hertz rental in the Edinburgh train station, and it was packed. The car rental was packed. So I went into a kiosk cafe, a little coffee shop there at the train station to just have a cup of coffee when maybe the crowd would thin down a bit. And I went back I remember vividly, at 2 minutes after 1. I did not suspect you would close down a car rental at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. That would never happen in our culture. But in Scotland, now it was empty and the doors were locked and they wouldn't let me in. And I had to have this car. And we had just translated shameless audacity. So I decided I'm going to bang and bang until they open that door. So I got out my keys and I started banging, and they were totally ignoring me with their bookwork. And I just kept banging and banging and banging and banging and banging, and I wouldn't let up. And finally they opened the door and they rented me the car. That's shameless audacity. And I go to a restaurant.
I do not fear God or man to keep this person from banging on my
Right,
door.
that's right. That's what, and eventually, if you keep at it, they'll finally give in. That's my illustration of shameless audacity, that it happened the same week we had made that translation. So that's what he's saying here, just don't give up. Keep working at it. But you can see how that fits in with work and money and so forth. But it takes some chutzpah to do it. You know what chutzpah is? It goes beyond there. I'll tell you what chutzpah is. This is Jewish chutzpah. Well, chutzpah is, this is chutzpah. I went into a gas station in Israel, in Jerusalem, and I had a Volkswagen camper, and I pulled up more so I'd be opposite my tank would be opposite the nozzle, okay? So I pull up slowly, get in the right position, and a little car digs in right behind me. And the guy jumps out, and he grabs the nozzle before I can get there. No, this is typical. But that's not chutzpah yet. This is typical Israel. Oh yeah, that's another world. Well, if you ever fly El Al and they say stay seated, forget it. Nobody stays seated. Everybody got to be first. I mean, and this is not chutzpah. This is just normal life. I learned this when I went to Israel. I wanted to take a bus, and I was right in front. And what happened is the bus came, and all of a sudden I got all these, slikha, which means forgive me, excuse me. And what happened is the bus was full, and I was left standing there. And then they wonder why they don't have peace. That's the truth. That's what happened. At any rate, this was not unusual that when I pulled up, because my camper was a little bit longer and he could jump right out of his little car, he just jumped right in front of me. And I said, well, that's the way it is and nothing I could do. I'm not going to have a fight over it. So again, I went into the shop there to get some peanuts or something. And when it came out, I've been there with a geologist. He was in the passenger seat. And this guy, I don't want to call him a Jew because it sounds some negative, but that's typical. He goes up and he says to my geologist friend, would you please move your camper forward so I can get out? And my geologist friend says to him, and what do you think? We're stupid too? Now, when he asks him to move the camper, now that's chutzpah. The first part is just nervy, but the next part, that's the next step. That's what I mean by chutzpah. Well, I can give you a number of stories of that in Israel. Okay. Well, so that's what it means, badger. And notice what it says here. When you look at the story, it's interesting to pay attention to it. I don't know if I want all that on a tape, but in any case, you may want to edit. It's not always politically correct. But I'm not a politically correct guy, so. You want me to edit it or not? You do what you want to do. Okay. And badger your neighbor. Oh. And badger your neighbors. You see, it's plural. Don't just badger him. Get other people involved too if you have to. Get his whole family involved if you have to. It's very interesting. It's plural. Get everybody involved. But you got to get out of this. So you can't be passive. And allow, this is the sixth imperative, allow no sleep. That is immediate action. Don't go to, so in other words, you've got to go and you have to do it immediately. And don't sleep, hoping it will go. Because the sooner you take care of it, the more readily the guy is going to excuse you from your folly of taking on the debt. So the conclusion is free yourself. That's the seventh imperative. It's the inclusio. And so he says, free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. In other words, as everybody knows, that an animal that's trapped will do everything it can to get out of that trap. So be like the animal, know you're in a trap, make every effort until the guy, it's better to let you go than to have you badgering him all the time. You know, a little unusual. But I think it has a lot to say about evangelism too, that it's not made to badger people. But I'll give it an example of being badgered. I go to a restaurant with some friends every Thursday. Two or three other guys. We have theological discussion. We go to the same place. Well, this waitress, she wants us to try this dessert that she loves. And every week, you've got to have this dessert. And she badgers us. Finally, I said to her, stop badgering us. She says, I feel about that dessert the way you feel about the gospel. And she reproved me. I got to tell you about this. It's that good. And I'm not going to be quiet about it. It's really, really good. And I said, you know, you persuaded me when you said it's like preaching the gospel. It's that good. Well, all right, you got me on that one. So there's a waitress that I'm finally going to order this dessert I don't need, but I don't want to keep badgering me about it. And when she said, you do it with the gospel, why can't I do it with the dessert I love? I was very interested.
Was it good?
I haven't had it yet. I still got to do it. My friend has been sick, but I plan to have it next time.
All right.
Okay. All right. So that's the one on the sluggard. The next one is going to be on the ant, the folly of scarcity, the model of the ant. And I guess we're going to have to use a Bible at this point, in that I didn't include it. I think sometimes I translate it because it's not exactly the NIV, and I have my own wording and so forth. So, folly of the sluggard, this is Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 11. Let's see. Six. Okay, so let's read it and then analyze it. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Note, no son here. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler. Yet it stores up its provision in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. So remember, we had that before with the field. And probably when he says that I went past the field and then I observed and took a lesson, probably it isn't that he coined the proverb. He probably applied this proverb that came from the ant to that situation, which is interesting to it. So the way we have the model of the ant in verses 6 through 9. This is on page 3 of your notes. Number 1, the model of the ant. And then the motive in page 2 is the second half, 9 through 11, is to avoid poverty. So it begins with the introduction, verse 6, that the wise ant will teach the sluggard good work habits. So the ant is smarter than the sluggard, knowing how to work. So here are the ant's work habits. He says, go to the ant. The first thing he learns, it has no commander. So in other words, he works out of his own nature. And if you want to be a good worker, it has to come out of your own heart and out of your own nature. And I think that throws us back on God, that he will give us this kind of a heart and that kind of a nature that we are willing to work. And so that's why I quoted Proverbs 4, above every watch, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And I make the comment again that it's his nature. And the book of Proverbs is not a how-to book. The book of Proverbs is how to become book, to make you into that kind of a person. So it's not legislation being handed down, it's activity that emerges from within the heart. And that's why you have these 9 chapters preparing the heart for where we're going. And I think that's what we have to pray for our children, that it will be in their heart, it will be in their nature to be this kind of person. It's not simply that we legislate. What are we to learn then? It has no commander, no overseer, no ruler. In other words, there's no one who is saying, you do this and you do that and you do that. In other words, with our children, I knew raising my boys, they would always be comparing themselves to one another. Well, he only has to do this. And so they were constantly making sure they didn't have to do more than the other person. And I think that's what he's driving at here. There's no overseer that to make sure that it's a fair proportion. You are gladly willing to do your share. You're not thinking about what the other person is doing, whether they're doing too little or too much. So you're not comparing yourself to other people. So if they're not working, I don't have to work. So there's no overseer and there's no ruler. You just doing all you can do according to your portion in the vineyard. I suspect that's what's intended. And I quote here 12:11 and 12. He who works his land will have plenty of food, abundant food, but he who chases fantasies lacks judgment. And so I do a little exegesis there. He who works his land, that's real work. That means you have to get rid of the rocks, you have to plow it, you have to fertilize it, cultivate it, till it. This is not the right sequence. It should have been cultivate, till, and fertilize, I think. And the other one is chasing fantasies. This is any kind of get-rich scheme that people have, such as or waiting for one's ship to come in. I think chasing fantasies is if you're depending on winning the lottery, or if you're depending on getting some job down the road or something. It's chasing a fantasy. Or another proverb that fits here. Dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. Dishonest money is money gotten, literally, is gotten by a puff of air that is without work, which could be the betting, gambling, or injustice. But it's any way you're getting money without work. And when it says gathers, it means he does it gradually. So, yet it stores up, and the next thing it says, thirdly, it has no commander. Oh, then I was commenting here, it stores up its provision. And my point is that stores takes work. It has to be done patiently. And it does a summer's work. And thirdly, it gathers it, which is hard work. And I quote other verses that deal with hard work. And that is what I'm trying to say. And it's in summer, the last thing. It gathers its food in the summer and gathers its food at harvest. In other words, it's timely work. So the 4 points that I learned from the ant are: number one, it has no commander. It does it out of its own nature. And it isn't looking at other people. There's no one making it work. He's not measuring his work. So that's the point to me of having no commander. And the second one, he stores it up, which means he patiently is preparing for the future. There's no quick get-rich schemes. The third one is he gathers it, and that entails hard work. And then in summer means timely work. Those are the things I think we are to learn from the ant in our work. And then we already commented, I think we can, the motive avoid poverty, I think we don't need to develop more on that. So the next one, dealing with anarchy, I don't quite see, that deals directly with money, and the next two that deal with the anarchist. I'm not going to take that up now. I can see the association. But there's a gradual increase here of wickedness. So you start with surety, that's not prudent. Sluggard is folly. And the next one is wickedness. So you go from kind of naivety to folly to wickedness in these three. There's these three types of inferior men, and it seems to be an appendix to why not get involved with the wayward women, because there too you're going to be reduced to slavery and to poverty. So I can kind of see why this is attached on here. If you have other insights, I'm glad to hear them, but I'm thinking, what's in the mind of Solomon when he puts this all together? Why did he put it this way? What are the associations going on in his mind? Because it's obvious when you're reading it, there are deliberate associations going on here. And so often when I was doing the commentary, I felt, I'm entering into the Solomon's mind perhaps in a way no one else has ever walked into it. Thinking about it, trying to think the way he thinks. Okay, now we're going to do another section. And that is, this is now on page 4, and Proverbs 10, 1 through 5. And again, I guess we're guessing. Have I translated this? Yes. Here I have it translated, so let's take that out. A wise son brings joy to his father. But a foolish son see, I added there, is grief to the mother. Now when you have that, a person is just an abstraction. It means it's total, whatever that abstraction. Say, the psalmist says, I am a man of prayer. He means I'm totally given to prayer.
Can you say that again?
Yes, when the subject is equated with an abstraction like that, like wickedness or prayer, it means totally that. A man of, I am peace. That's the psalm, for example. When it says that abstraction, peace, he means I am totally peace, totally committed to peace. And here, when it says a foolish son is grief to his mother, it's total grief to the mother. It's grief to the mother. Treasures gained by wickedness are of no eternal value, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. Lazy hands make a poor man, but diligent hands bring wealth. He who gathers crops in summer is a wise son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. This is a unity because the next section is dealing with speech. Blessings crown the head of, let's have open our Bibles here. And we'll take up chapter 6, verse 10 tomorrow chapter 10 and verse 6 tomorrow, which deal with speech. Because you can see now it switches to blessings crown the head of the righteous, but violence overwhelms the mouth of the wicked. And then from there on in, it deals with mouth. So, for example, in 8, you have the chattering fool. In verse 10, you have the chattering fool. Verse 11, the mouth of the righteous. Verse 13, it's on the lips of the discerning. Verse 14, the mouth of the person. So you can see 6 through 14 is all about speech or communication. And we'll take that unit tomorrow. So it's clearly quite distinct from 1 through 5, which seems to be dealing with wealth. Okay? Now, looking it over, I also note the stitching pattern, allowing virtue to be a plus and vice to be a minus. So notice how it runs. It goes plus, minus, minus, plus, plus, minus, minus, plus, plus, plus. No, minus, plus, plus, minus. And this is very not unusual either. So they're stitched together. So you see a wise son, that's a plus. A foolish son, that's a minus. Wickedness, that's a minus. To be righteousness, that's a plus. 3a, righteousness, a plus. Wicked, a minus. Lazy hand, poor man, minus. Diligent hand, wealth, plus. You can see how it's stitched together. Plus, minus, minus, plus, plus, minus, minus. It's interesting. I think it's there partly for memorization, so you're kind of stitching it one after the other. Just an observation of how things are done. Now, looking at it from a semantic structure of how these are put together, that you have the introduction of the contrasting effects of the wise and foolish son on the parent. Now, I say there's an inclusio here because in verse 5 he comes back to the disgraceful son. So you could see it's kind of framed by two different kinds of son, a wise son and a disgraceful son at the end of it. So that's the introduction to it, and that's the seam. And again, notice the father and the mother. And the reason that you put the wise son with the father and the foolish son with the mother is that there's not some kind of necessary connection the father in wisdom and the mother in foolishness. It's simply the nature of Hebrew poetry that you always put the father in the A verse set and the mother in the B verse set. It's just the nature of Hebrew poetry. And it doesn't mean that the father uniquely gets joy, but he doesn't get grief. And the mother uniquely gets grief, and the father doesn't feel the grief as much as the mother. The great commentary Delitzsch makes that point, but in my judgment, that's a misunderstanding of it. This is a stereotype breaking apart, and therefore you're going to get, by the nature of poetry, this combination of them. It means, I think, therefore, a wise son brings a mother and father joy. A foolish son brings a mother and father grief. But you can't say that it does it by simply that kind of parallelism. So both get joy and both get grief from the wise and foolish. Now we come to the body of the material, or the B, which deals with ethics and theology regarding being money wise. And we go here from, the wicked go from treasures to hunger. And the righteous go from being delivered from death to never hunger. Now, that these go together, this is a little bit, you can get some of this in English, but not all of it. That I underscored the Hebrew there, the yo elilu lo yariv, you can't read the Hebrew, but I underscore it. That is an unusual thing to get in the Proverbs. I don't know anything quite like that in the Proverbs, where you get lo with the hif, what we call the hifil, lo with the hifil. And the sound of it is unique. That's putting these two verses together in a quatrain, and they ought to be understood together, in other words. And you'll notice, if you look at your English, that you have wicked, righteous, righteous, wicked. You can see the words that are stitching this together as well. So this is a quatrain. And what you get here, therefore, is you get the ethics in verse 2 of the ethics of being righteous or wicked. And then in verse B, you get the theology behind the ethics, so that it's the Lord who upholds it. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. So, in other words, the wicked, we already commented this, treasures gained by wickedness entails that the wicked have treasures for the moment, but it does not profit in the final analysis, because the book is looking at the end of the matter. It doesn't deliver you from death. Wickedness will eventually put you into death. But if you just have, if you just had verse 3, you can see how you can misunderstand this. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry. What are you going to do with that? Jesus hungered 40 days and 40 nights. Israel hungered in the wilderness. If you just read a proverb by itself, it's a half-truth. You have to read the whole book to get the whole truth, which is saying that in the preceding verse, it's conceding the wicked have treasures for the moment, and it's in the final analysis that it is the wicked that go hungry. But you have to look at the end of the matter. And that's why I'm troubled when people simply quote a proverb to me. I want to know the context of that proverb so I can interpret it correctly. And that's what I'm saying. When you do topical preaching, make sure you consider all the proverbs in the context, is the point. And then the theology, it is the Lord that upholds the moral order. So that's the ethics of it's of no eternal value, and the reason is the Lord stands behind it. And remember, I said that, and you notice what happens then is you have these ethical terms in 2 and 3, but notice in verse 5 you have the sapient terms of wise and disgraceful, but wise especially. And I'm saying these are correlative terms. And I've also said that righteousness is disadvantaging yourself to serve other people. It's counterintuitive to them. And I think I told some of you, my good friend Tremper and I, stop me if I told you this, on the tape. But anyway, I really, Tremper's a very fine person, very fine scholar, but we don't fully agree about the interpretation of Ecclesiastes. And one of the things we differ on is that he doesn't feel you can take Ecclesiastes at straight face value. He believes you have to stand in judgment on Kohelet and determine from covenant values of what is right and what is wrong. All right? In the same way you read historical books. To a certain extent, how do you know whether what's right and wrong and what the people are doing? In a way, you have to bring to bear on it the covenant values of the book of the law to interpret it. And he does that with the Kohelet. And so he began his lecture with when the Kohelet says, don't be over righteous, don't be over wicked, don't be over wise, don't be over foolish. Now there you see how those are correlative terms: righteous, wicked, wise, foolish. And don't be over righteous, over wicked, over wise, over foolish. Who would teach their children that? And it's, to him, that's obviously wrong. And so I shared with him my experience where that proverb saved me. And that is when I lived in Philadelphia. You know, they get quite a bit of snow. And not like Buffalo, by the way, but they still get snow. And we had a quarter acre of land on it. And so therefore in the winter I had a lot of shoveling of snow, had a fairly good sized driveway. And so it would take about 2 hours to shovel the sidewalk and the driveway. Now in Philadelphia, nobody moves. I mean, that's the most conservative place. When I went there, you know how we used to have in telephone numbers, there were letters? Like it would be, my telephone was Bergen, you had a B or something. Well, I got there, this is in the 1980s, and I see 0 RE. I go, what is that? What it was they still had letters. It was Orland. And the 0, what I thought was 0, was an O, the letter O. They still hadn't gotten to numbers yet. That's how conservative Philadelphia is. I mean, that's the most conservative place I've ever been. So nobody moves. So the houses where I bought, they had all been built around 1940. Mine was 1939, just in the war years. And so everybody there was still the original owners. So naturally, my neighbors were all rather old. And next to me was a widow. She was about 90. Across the street was an Italian couple that we enjoyed their Italian bread. They were about 90. Next to me was Mr. Detweiler, and his family came over with William Penn, you know, and so forth. Well, at any rate, I shoveled my sidewalk for 2 hours, and then I thought the widow, well, she can't shovel them. And so I said, I'll do her the kindness. So I shoveled her sidewalk, I shoveled her driveway. And then I thought, oh, well, these old couple across the street, they can't do it. So I went over there and I shoveled their sidewalk. By now, you know, I had been shoveling sidewalks for 6 hours. And now I still had Mr. Detweiler. And then it came to me, Bruce, don't be overly righteous. Don't be overly wicked. There's a point where you have to act selfishly. And you can't simply always be doing for your neighbor. And that's equivalent to being wise and being foolish. Because wise is when I'm serving you, foolish is when I'm serving myself. But I told Trump that proverb saved my conscience. That it told me don't overdo it and use some common sense in the matter. So, yes, Carissa.
Do you think that's related to this Proverbs 6 becoming surety for a stranger? Like that seems like, oh, that's an ultimate way to disadvantage yourself for the benefit of someone else.
Well, that's a good point. Why
but
would
it's
you do that?
unwise.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but that, because Sirach, to support what you're thinking here and suggesting, Sirach said it's a kindness. See, I thought maybe you did it because you were hoping for some interest or some benefit from it. But it could be it was just overly kind of you. And that's a kindness that's too far. That's very helpful. So thank you for making that suggestion, Carissa. Yeah, that could well be. It makes sense. Because you wonder, why would you put yourself into a position of surety And I was thinking there must be some gain out of it. But Cyrus puts it as kindness. So that would fit. Thank you. Okay. So that's the ethics and theology of it, and the Lord upholds it, and we're looking at the end of the matter. So the Lord upholds the moral order, he feeds the righteous, he starves the wicked, ultimately. It's just for a moment. But you see, without faith, you can't please God. The book of Proverbs is not humanistic. You have to depend upon God to uphold the book. And that's why when McCain wants to split the secular from the sacred, to my mind, that just tears this book apart. That theology stands behind it. Practical theology now comes in verses 4 and 5. Lazy hands make a poor man, which is an oxymoron, that lazy hands make something. And what does it make? What does it construct? A poor man. I think that's very oxymoronic, frankly. But diligent hands brings wealth. But what good is work if you don't do it at the right time? He who gathers crops in summer is a wise son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. So you have to work in a timely way. So this, to me, is practical theology. And so the vice is lazy palms, makes poverty, but very diligent. And the virtue is timely diligence, as the ant, summer and harvest, shows prudence, and the vice is to sleep. And the conclusion is, at the end of it, that the one who does this, let's see, but he who sleeps during harvest is either wise son or disgraceful son. So we came back. What is a foolish son? Well, he's equated here with the son who either doesn't work or doesn't work in the right way, and that's the son that will bring you shame. And as I say, shame is when you made a risk on something. Serving others according to God's standards yields eternal life. Serving self may yield immediate gain, but will yield eternal death, because the Lord stands behind this moral order. A son's industry and forethought give temporal wealth, and give parents joy to him and to them, and it gives to them social standing. Sloth produces poverty and shame, would be my conclusion of what I learned from the passage. So that's looking at a text holistically that I think deals with being money wise. Okay? Now we'll do another text, another whole text. So turn with me, if you will, to Psalm 49. Now, I'm moving outside of Proverbs, but I'm dealing with wisdom literature. I'd like to show you a wisdom poem outside of the book of Proverbs. And you can see you can have wisdom literature outside the book. So let me read, if I may, Psalm 49. Now, I should say here, my own thesis is, and I understand we're going to debate this next summer, that where you have for the director of music, I'm convinced that's the subscript to the preceding psalm. That is, that musical notation, for the director of music, sometimes it has a preposition phrase according to Sheminit, the musical tune. I'm convinced that those are postscripts to the preceding psalm, that the superscript identifies the author and the genre, as in Proverbs 1:1, this Proverbs of Solomon, son of David. The superscript is the author and the genre, and in this case, it's of the sons of Korach, a priestly clan, and it is a psalm. So here we have wisdom literature put, and it's to be sung to the pizzicato of a stringed instrument. That's what a psalm is. It's a song sung with the pizzicato. So this one, you actually would sing it. So let's hear it. Hear this, all you peoples. Listen, all who live in this world, both low and high and rich and poor alike. My mouth will speak words of wisdom. The meditation of my heart will give you understanding. I will turn my ear to a proverb. With the harp, I will expound my riddle. So you can see this is wisdom. The substance of it in verse 3, the substance of it is wisdom and instruction, and the style is a proverb that needs to be interpreted. So you can see that's very much like the preamble to the book of Proverbs. And we're going to see what the riddle is and what the proverb is. Why should I fear when evil days come, when wicked deceivers surround me, those who trust in their wealth and boast of their great riches? No one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. The ransom for life is costly. No payment is ever enough, so that they should live on forever and not see decay. For all can see that wise die, the foolish and not senseless also perish, leaving their wealth to others. Their tombs will remain their houses forever, their dwellings for endless generations, though they had named lands after themselves. Adam, people, despite their wealth, do not endure. They are like the beasts that perish. I think it actually is a man, despite his wealth, does not endure. He is like the beasts that perish. This is the fate of all those who trust in themselves and of their followers who approve their sayings. They are like sheep and are destined to die. Death will be their shepherd, but the upright will prevail over them in the morning. Their forms will decay in the grave, far from their princely mansions. But God will redeem me from the realm of the dead. He will surely take me to himself. Do not be overawed when others grow rich, when the splendor of their houses increases, for they will take nothing with them when they die. Their splendor will not descend with them. Though while they live, they count themselves blessed, and people praise you when you prosper. They would join those who have gone before them, who will never again see the light of life. People who have wealth, or a man who has wealth but lacks understanding, are like the beast that perish. Now let's look at our notes. And we divide it into the introduction, verses 1 through 4, that identifies it as a sage who is the author. And he's addressing everybody. And then we have the main body of the material. And there is no conclusion as such. It's just a refrain. All right, so looking at it, the audience is, well, let's just read it again. 49:1. Hear this, all you peoples, listen, all who live in the world. So the audience is everybody. But there are on economic levels, they differ. And they're going to hear the message differently. The low will be consoled. The high are going to be warned. The rich are going to be sobered. And the poor are going to be comforted. And this is reader response. That according to your economic, social class, you're going to hear the proverb differently in response. The proverb is the same, the meaning is the same, but your situation varies, and we'll all hear it differently. So that's the audience, everyone. So I say the same message produces different reader responses. The law consoles, the high sobered, the rich are warned, it should be, and the poor are comforted. Now we have the author. My mouth will speak words of wisdom, that's the substance. The meditation of my heart will give you understanding. And now the style is going to be a proverb. Now it's very important here, or helpful, to know that the Hebrew word for proverb is mashal. Remember I commented that the name for Solomon is an anagram. His is Shilamo, and this is mashal. So the name for Solomon, I give you it here, see, it's M-S-H-L. The SH is one consonant. And the vowels that go in there are A's, M-A-S-H-A-L, a mashal. And the word Shilamo, it's an anagram. His name is the SH, and then the L, and then the M. And so you see the anagram of Shilamo, the proverb. Now, the body of the material from verses 5 through 20 is you have 16 verses total. And they fall into 2 equal halves, 8 verses and 8 verses, and they are divided by a refrain. The 8th verse in each half is a refrain. So you have in verse, here's the refrain, people, despite their wealth, do not endure. They are like the beasts that perish. And then at the end of the poem, you have the same refrain, and it's in Hebrew, it's much closer than our English translation. People who have wealth but lack understanding are like the beasts that perish. So you have a refrain, like the beasts that perish. That's the proverb. The word mashal means to compare, to be like. The verb translated here, are like, is the Hebrew word mashal. That is the proverb. And in Hebrew, you can see it very clearly. It's the nifal form, the nimshal. I'm glad Chris is here. She can validate what I'm doing here. So it's the nimshal. So he's going to give you a mashal. And so what's the mashal? They're like the beasts that perish. That's the comparison. If I go too fast, stop me. You all with me? Okay. 8 and 8, refrain, refrain. It's going to be a mashal, and here you have the verb, they are like. And this is going to be the proverb. So what are the two halves saying? Well, the first half is saying that clinical death is certain and final for everybody. Wise and foolish alike. Everybody is going to die. That's the first half. Doom is certain for everyone. But he's going to argue in the beginning, there's A under that, 5 through 12, and the clinical death is certain. There's no need to fear those who trust in their wealth. It's not going to endure. This is not a permanent situation, in other words. And notice how he puts it. He said, why should I fear when evil days come, when wicked deceivers surround me? Notice their God, who trust in their wealth and boast of their great significance. And it's interesting to me that I've drawn from my own conclusion that money gives you security and it gives you significance. And that's exactly what he's saying here. The security is you trust in it. And your significance is you boast about it and you show it off. And so you could see, I had already drawn that conclusion, and this verse confirmed what I had intuitively grasped from the scriptures of why mammon is a god that gives what God is security and significance. And these people find their security in their portfolios and their investments, but they never have a real security. It's never enough. And I remember I was watching on the Larry King show, he's having an interview with Nancy Sinatra. And he asked her, what did Frank, her father, what did he fear? He feared poverty. That's what he feared. He grew out of poverty. He was afraid he'd always go back into poverty again. Interesting enough. No matter how many millions he made, he never had enough. And you never have enough because you always know it's a house of cards. You always know the stock market can utterly crash. You know that you never know if somebody will come and plunder our country. and all of our money is gone. It's never enough. You're never secure. It's very hard when you're entering into retirement to think about, I have to live by faith, and yet what's prudence in it? And I think the issue to that is equal to Israel. The king could not multiply horses, military. He couldn't multiply money. He couldn't multiply wives for political alliances. He had to be at a point, he needed horses and so forth. It doesn't say having no horses, but you're in a position where you have to walk by faith. And I think that's the balance that I'm trying to achieve, that I never have such that I could say, I have enough, who needs the Lord? Some thoughts about that. Now he begins that in verses 7 and 8, that death is certain. None has enough money to redeem another person from death. No one can, no matter how much money you have, you can never pay off death. No amount of money will save you. No one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. And so, in other words, if you had all the kings in the world wanting to save you, you can't. You're like a Humpty Dumpty on a wall, and all the king's men and all the king's horses could not put Humpty Dumpty together again. And so when you fall off the wall in death, all the king's horses and all the king's men can never give you life again. It's sort of like that. The ransom for life is costly. No payment is ever enough so that they should live on forever and not see decay. So were imaginatively, were the moon, a coin of silver in one pocket, the sun, a coin of gold. In another pocket were the Milky Way, pearls around my neck, were the planets, rubies and sapphires, and emeralds on my fingers. It's not enough. Nothing will save me. That's the point. And its final death, verses 9 to 11. So that they should live on forever and not see decay, for all can see, we all know it, that the wise die, that the foolish and senseless also perish, and both leave their wealth to others. So this is death for everybody, wise and foolish as well. No distinction. It's for all. And the tombs are forever. Namely, clinical death is final. And they named lambs after themselves. That is the rich and the famous. I one time was with I wish he was still living, Gerhard Hassel. He taught at Andrews University, Seventh-day Adventist. He was, to my mind, he's the guy that should have written biblical theology. He was a German guy and brilliant and well-read. And I said to him, Gerhard, be sure you write a theology, because you're the one to write it. But he died prematurely, unfortunately, I think in a car accident. Anyway, I was invited, he had invited me to go up to Andrews and to be part of an examining committee on their PhD work. And we were going by, he showed me this lake named after somebody, and he told me the story of it. And he said this man owned this land, and the state offered him huge sum. No amount of money would persuade him to sell his land. Finally, they said, we're going to put a lake here, and we're going to name the lake after you, and it will be on the map. Sold it just like that. He wanted some kind of social immortality. He wanted to be remembered after his death. And in my mind, I thought to myself, he might just as well written his name on water. It won't endure. And they name lands after themselves, but it won't endure, finally. So, therefore, he comes to the refrain, Vadam vikra bal yadin nipshal ka behamot nidmu, which means Adam, man, bikar, in honor, Bal, a little bit unusual, it's a negative. It's like the ally was talking about, does not endure. Nimshal, He is like like the beast. They are likened like that perish, that are destroyed. And I give you the words there. Yalin is crucial, does not endure. And the nimshal is the word for mashal. And they are like the beast, all flesh dies. That's the point. That so far as our flesh is concerned and our clinical death, we're no different from the animals. They all die like the beast and go back to corruption. It's just honest wisdom. But now we come to the second half of the proverb. And that is, the doom of the rich is eternal, but not of the righteous. This takes us beyond death. And there is a separation between the wise and the foolish, the righteous and the wicked. Looking therefore at verses 13 and 14. Where are we here? 13 and 14. This is the fate of those who trust in themselves, of their followers who approve their sayings, and that accept this philosophy, who trust in their wealth. That takes us right back to verse 5, obviously, who trust in their wealth. Now, this is the faith of those who have faith in mammon and not in God. This is the faith, their ultimate faith. They are like sheep and are destined to die. And here's a strange figure. Death will be their shepherd. But then, by contrast, the upright, who will prevail over them in the morning, but their forms will decay and degrade, far from their princely mansions. He goes back to that for those who trust in their wealth. But now notice, whereas no man could redeem another man, note the contrast, but God will redeem me from the realm of the dead. That's not my final state. God will pay the price and redeem me. And of course, we as Christians know that price was paid with Christ, that he will redeem me from the realm of the dead. I do not understand people who do not see resurrection or afterlife in the Old Testament. It just, to me, flies right in the face of wisdom literature. And when we had all those proposals from John Walton, and he wanted to get rid of them all, I was fighting that, like, this is crazy to me. How can you read a psalm like this and draw that kind of conclusion? But he says very clearly, God will redeem me from the realm of the dead. He will surely take me to himself. That's the same word for Elijah and for Enoch, that God took him. And God will surely take me to himself from where? From the realm of the dead, where I was. This is saying I'm going to be saved somehow in after death. So, the conclusion, do not be overawed when others grow rich, when the splendor of their houses increases, for they will take nothing with them when they die. Their splendor will not descend with them. Though while they live, they count themselves blessed, and invariably people will praise you when you're rich. But they will join those who have gone before them, who will never again, by contrast, see the light of light. Now the refrain. People who have wealth but lack understanding are like the beasts that perish. But the phrase here is very interesting. Now, so you can see it, I gave you the Hebrew, I translated. Notice the similarity. Bika, a man in wealth. Note the change. The negative has changed from a bow to the typical low. But note the change of one letter from Yalin to Yavin. And it's the difference that Yalin means to endear, Yavin means to understand. And we're talking now about the one who lacks understanding, whereas the wise man, he began to say, I'm going to give you understanding. This is the one who wouldn't accept it. So we're now talking about the death of the one who lacks understanding. So not to endure, that's true of everybody, but what I'm saying now is about those who lack understanding. So the difference in the refrain is one letter, an L to a B. You could see the riddle. It's very brilliantly put together. Yalin, Yavin, and the rest of it, Nimshal, Kabehamot, Nidmu. Everything's the same. except that one letter. But I think he's deliberately using two different negatives of the low and the bow, so you see it. So it's the one who is without understanding who destroyed forever. That's not true of those who have Yavin. They are not destroyed forever. None endure, but it isn't true forever. God will redeem my life. And that's a tremendous poem that deals with money, it seems to me. So I wanted to share that with you. It's a great poem. Yeah.
Are you done with this
Yeah,
discussion?
I'm finished.
There's a question that's been going through my mind, and it's only partially related, but it has to do with how you understand Proverbs in general. And I was just looking for a sample, and here's one in 24. For though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again,
Yeah.
but the wicked stumble when
Yeah.
calamity strikes.
Right.
And you look at it, and at one level you say, well, that's just simply not true. There are many righteous that don't rise, and there's many
Yeah.
rich that don't. Okay, so.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, well, maybe the answer is this long-term perspective, because eventually it works out.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to wondering, from what you're saying, is really, if you really believe that verse, not just that it's going to be true in heaven and hell, but that's how God has structured the world right now, that the Proverbs they're not trite,
No.
that it's a deeply profound statement that you have to have faith to have it shape your worldview. Am I thinking the right direction?
You are, but I think you have. Were you here when I discussed does it promise too much?
Yes.
And you remember I said there is a future hope, and
Mhm.
that future hope is beyond clinical death.
Yeah.
So even here when it says, though a righteous man falls 7 times, 7 means he's dead.
Mhm.
He's out. Yet he will rise. It's not the final word.
Yeah.
So that's why, then I tried to show how it does say immortality and tried to
Yeah.
take some verses. So I think if you end life on Good Friday, Christ is a fool. You have to push on to Easter Sunday. The trouble is, Christians don't want the Good Friday. They want Easter Sunday right away. So I don't think you could read Proverbs and same thing true with Psalm 49. I don't think you can make sense out of life without something beyond the grave, because the wise and foolish all die alike. And if that's the end of it, then death is the final word. There is no more.
Let me ask the question in a different way, and I'll be intentionally trite.
Mm-hmm.
If it's true that the righteous aren't really rewarded till heaven, and the wicked.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
I didn't say that.
Okay, I'm making up a proverb. So
Yeah.
that's why-
I didn't hear you say that.
No,
Yeah,
I'm not saying that.
I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
I can't think of an exact proverb. See, well, my concern is that I think some people will look at this and go, "Why does it really matter here and now? If this is just going to be true
Yeah.
at judgment,
Okay,
then
that's a good-
does it really matter?"
Yeah.
Okay, if the wicked are not really going to be punished to hell, and the righteous really aren't going to be rewarded till heaven, then I'm going to live my life any way I really want, because it'll all be taken care of when I get to heaven. I mean, I'm just,
I don't see how that would follow.
yeah.
Yeah, because the way you live now, 1 Timothy 6, that we are presently building our house in eternity. So that whatever foundation we are laying now, we may be laying the foundations of a shack, or we can be laying the foundations of a mansion. So I think that I don't want to make it too much of a dichotomy, because, but Paul says if there is no resurrection, we are the all men most miserable. And Jesus went to the cross for the joy that was set before him. And so my 70, 80 years are nothing compared to eternity. But it is also true, I experience God's goodness now as well. But there are many people who don't experience it now, especially where they suffer or they're hungry. Take the people in the Ukraine, the Mennonites, they were almost decimated, except they're not like the Jews, they don't complain. They're more passive.
So the one note sound is going to kick in again here. there's something missing in this psalm, and that there's no resurrection
No.
mentioned, but clearly the righteous inherits the Lord himself.
Well, what do you make of, but the Lord will redeem me from the realm of death. He will surely take me to himself.
Surely take him to himself, okay,
15.
right,
So doesn't that, and no man can redeem another man from death, but
Right.
God will redeem me from the realm of death. So no man can save another person from dying, but God is going to redeem me from the realm of the dead and
right.
take me to himself. Now, it seems to me that implies immortality of some sort.
That makes sense to me.
Mhm.
And so I feel like I should be free to say that the unrighteous will not escape the grave. That's where they'll finally end up.
Mhm.
So
That's what this psalm is saying. And
So
the,
the judgment, we don't see the judgment here that's in between the two outcomes. I don't know if I'm saying that.
what do you mean by the judgment?
There's this sense that there will be, the graves will be emptied at a point in time,
Mhm.
and the righteous will be resurrected to
Yeah,
eternal life with God,
yeah,
and the wicked have
Yeah.
death after that.
yeah.
And
Of course,
so that's
would,
why-
would it be helpful to say that the book of Apocalypse is looking beyond even the grave to the final eschaton?
Okay,
And so what he's looking at in this moment, for most of us, we're not in that final eschaton. We are where he is, and what I see is everybody going to the grave.
oh, I see that,
Yeah, we all see that. Anybody can see that.
yeah,
What we can't see is that God will redeem me from the grave. That's where faith comes in.